Imina 36 ng Legislature Guam is back in session. We are on the second reading. Welcome back, colleagues. Good afternoon. Majority Leader Senator Nelson, you are recognized. We are on Bill 292-36 LS.
Madam Speaker, I move to resolve into the Committee of the Whole for the purposes of deliberating on Bill number 292-36 LS, which is an act to amend subsection 73203, subsection 73204, and subsection 73205 of Article 2, Chapter 73, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to charges for carrier off-duty services of customs and quarantine officers, and to further establish a customs carrier off-duty services customs administrative processing fee. And also, Madam Speaker, that we would invite the panel of guests that we asked to be present today who are outside in the foyer.
On the motion to resolve into the Committee of the Whole for Bill 292-36 LS to be chaired by the Oversight Chairperson, our Majority Leader, Senator Nelson. Is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We will call in the panel and resolve into Committee of the Whole.
The Committee of the Whole is now in session. is now called to order. Materials for the Committee of the Whole are in the shared session Google Drive folder labeled 102422, Committee of the Whole. Proposed amendments to this bill must be submitted in writing to the clerk via email at 36glsession@gmail.com. That's for the senators here present today. And if you do not have any amendments and they're not in writing, it will be called out of order. Can you hear me now? Can you please turn for the AV team to turn on the speakers or increase the volume of the speakers in the session hall? Okay, good. 3 rounds for discussion. These are our rules of engagement. 3 rounds for discussion. We will have 2 rounds of questions for the panel, with each senator allotted 5 minutes for questions, not including responses. Time to speak may not be yielded from more than one member to another. A member who yields that member's time on a question yields all that member's time on that question and may not later speak, even if all the time yielded was not used. This is in accordance with Section 1.02 Delta 3 in our legislative rules. After the completion of the 2 rounds of questions, panelists will be excused, and the 3rd round is for amendments and comments. After we complete discussion of the bill, I allow a closing and will entertain a motion for the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole, followed by a motion to rise from the Committee of the Whole, at which time I will report out the bill as recommended by the Committee of the Whole. Thank you. Bill number 292-36LS is an act to amend subsection 73203, 73204, and 73205 of Article 2, Chapter 73, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to charges for carrier off-duty services of customs and quarantine officers, and to further establish a customs carrier off-duty services customs administrative processing fee. Okay. I'll now call for the Sergeant of Arms to swear in the panel for this Committee of the Whole.
Please rise. Please raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, do you all affirm that any and all information you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Madam Chair, you're under oath. You may proceed.
Thank you, Sergeant of Arms. I'll go into our legislative findings and intent for this bill, number 292-36LS. Legislature in Guam finds that the Customs and Quarantine Agency implemented the Off-Duty Services Program to provide paid services to all operations of any person, excluding air carriers and passengers arriving at AB Wonpat Guam International Air Terminal and passengers arriving on Guam via ocean vessels. That require the service of Customs and Quarantine agencies on any day of the week, upon special request on Sundays, holidays, or between the hours of 1700 of any other day and 0600 hours of the following day. Legislature in Guam also finds that this program delivers direct convenience and support to Guam customs shipping and cargo stakeholders who seek advantageous hours for customs clearance of ships and cargo to increase their business competitive advantage and desire for quicker access to their goods and prefer to pay the additional costs using the ODS program. We further find that the shortage of customs officers and the restriction found in 73203, Article 2, Chapter 73, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, which instructs Guam customs officers participating in the ODS program not exceed a maximum charge of $275 per officer per day, referred to further herein as the ODS charge cap. This difficulty during the staffing assignment of custom officers for off-duty services and their officers willing to provide services who have reached their ODS charge cap are prohibited from accepting additional assignments. This situation forces duty officers performing routine operations to be redirected to off-duty service requests to complete customs clearance process. The Legislature Guam also finds the presence of unintentional adverse financial impacts, unfunded mandates, and operational constraints exacted upon the agency and officers due to the ODS charge cap. Guided by policy, Guam Customs directs customs officers to complete ODS program work that cross into their regular duty day as part of their duty. In instances when officers' ODS program work crosses into their off-duty and personal time, Guam Custom authorizes government overtime compensation. This unscheduled and unplanned overtime work disproportionately burdens the government and creates a cost-free benefit for user of the ODS program at the expense of the government and customs officers. This overtime will be referred to herein as the ODS charge cap government overtime. Because the ODS charge cap government overtime remains unfunded, Guam Customs Management must compensate affected officers using compensatory time accrued. This ODS charge cap government overtime compounds officer staffing problems because the officer is no longer on duty for the period of time off caused by the ODS charge cap. The current day problem of unavailability of funds has evolved into officers performing the ODS charge cap government overtime with their work on their own personal time without compensation. Legislature Guam further finds there no longer exist inspectors of the Plant Protection and Quarantine section of the Department of Agriculture. The pertinent language is amended to reflect current day conditions and finds the intent to protect officers from fatigue caused by excessive duty performance, which remains valid, but the impediments of the ODS charge cap must be eliminated so the ODS program remains beneficial to shipping and cargo clearance stakeholders, customs officers, and the government. Colleagues, I'd like to ask your indulgence as I'm feeling under the weather, but we do have the Director of Customs and Quarantine, and I'll have everyone on the panel introduce themselves. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ike Paredo, Director of Customs.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vincent Perez. I am the Chief of Customs.
Good afternoon. I'm Colonel Francis Farron, Assistant Chief of Inspection and Control Division.
John Rick Mendiola with the Director's Office.
Lester Carlson with BBMR.
And Edward Byrne, Director of Administration.
Thank you very much for introducing yourself, gentlemen. We'll start from the back of the session hall, and so we'll start with Senator Taitigui. Senator Taitigui, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to those who are sitting on the panel this afternoon. Appreciate it, and I apologize for it's kind of warm in here, but our work must continue to go on. So if you need some ice water, let us know. We'll be happy to get you some ice water to cool you down. Director Pareda, can you kind of explain what exactly is this bill going to do for your customs officers as far as payment is concerned? And from what I gather is this is for those inspections that are done after hours. So can you kind of explain the process? What happens, after hours? And also if you can explain who gets chosen to be on duty to be able to avail themselves of that extra funding. Okay.
Thank you for the question, Senator. Well, let me start out by saying that the ODS program is a program that has been established by the agency to accommodate importers and other individuals that are requesting for services after normal working hours. This is a voluntary program, and what happens is that when the office is closed after 5 o'clock and the importer requests for services, then the agency will provide the officer to conduct whatever inspection that's required from them. And that's according to this law. Now, we have a system in the agency where the monitoring of the listing of officers that are available for these services are also manned at the airport on a 24-hour basis. So the admin officer at the airport has a listing of officers based on the listing that's provided, and they will follow the procedure insofar as who is called to provide such services. And this is recorded on a 24-hour basis. So again, this services is only administered at the request of the importers or individuals that would like customs to provide the additional services after normal working hours.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Perez, can you add into that?
Yes, thank you, Senator. So one of the things that has to happen is you have to have control measures for any program. And so with this off-duty service, we have a policy that governs all officers. And the way it works is that all officers' names who are voluntarily enlisting their services are put on a list alphabetically. And so whenever a consignee or an importer is contacting the airport for services after hours, we go through a list. And that list is strictly maintained. And any changes that are made have to be, there has to be an input as to what changes were made, when they were made, who made them, and why they were made. So if there are names A through Z and A through F do not choose to work it, the next person on the available will be called. In reference to why we're here today with the $275 cap is that this cap was implemented, I'm thinking almost 20 plus years ago, and does not take into consideration the many changes that we've experienced as far as salaries are concerned. Many years ago, it was unheard of for anybody ever to make $275 in one day. And so what this law does is that it kind of prohibits or ties our hands in as far as trying to make sure that we provide adequate services to the public and to the importers or to those who need it. So oftentimes we'll find that we have to make adjustments to operations, and that impacts other operations within the agency. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Perez. Appreciate that. And also, the cost right now, the current cost for customs and quarantine, or let me backtrack this. $275, right, currently is paid from the consumer, the one who wants their stuff to be inspected, you know, the cargo inspected. It's paid by the consumer, and this amount is given to the officer who's coming to inspect it. Is that currently correct?
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And what the law's going to do is lift that amount from 275 to what amount?
There is no identified amount, but we would like to proffer a reasonable suggestion to take into consideration that the cap of 275 in relation to the changes that we've experienced as far as salaries are concerned. I'm talking specifically about like when the law enforcement community received that overall 40% increase years ago, and then as well as other like the 18% increase that we just recently received. All of these are impacts to this off-duty service. So then now what happens is that our officers are working less time and have to be taken off because they reach that cap much more quickly.
Okay. Was there any, Captain or Director, was there any recommendation on a certain hourly rate or a number? Because obviously in the past, well, currently there is a number amount. Has there been any suggestion at all? on how much that would be now, how much you would charge now?
Well, one of the things that we may want to put out there is that this program is a program that was mimicked by the federal government. We followed the USDA and back then the Legacy United States Customs Service. And so what their program entailed is that to take into consideration the amount of time that an officer has to be contacted, called for duty, and for reporting for duty, they came up with a formula that it was 3 times the hourly rate of the officer for consideration of all these other incidental things that come into effect. And just the fact that if I'm off duty and you're calling me at 3:30 in the morning, there's got to be some incentive for officers to want to come in. Otherwise, we would have less officers providing service.
Is there anything in the bill that actually talks about how you're going to go through this, like, creating rules and regs or creating a salary increase with DOA to ensure that, that amount is not exorbitant, or that these customers, which basically will probably pass on this charge to the consumer, which is us, is not going to increase so much that we're going to start seeing it at our grocery stores.
Senator, just to clarify with the rate, we use the officer's hourly rate as the basis of determining the fee for the which the importer will pay. So it's not $275 flat. It's based on the officer's hourly rate and how long it takes for them to complete the custom service. That's how it's determined.
Thank you, John. And is that on page of the bill? Is that on page 4 at the top line, talking about rate at 1.5 times officer's hourly rate? Is that the section?
It begins at page 3, Senator
Or
Tyree.
page 3, I'm sorry.
At the
yeah.
bottom of page 3, in section 2, that's where it begins.
Page 3.
Page 3, I think that's letter I, is that correct?
Yes,
Letter
yes.
I?
This is the actual verbiage that's in the current law right now.
And that's what you're going to start utilizing?
Yeah, that's what we've been using so far already.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tyree. Senator Frank Blas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Director or Chief, the ODS program, how's it currently funded?
The ODS program is not funded from the government. It's paid strictly by the importer and the users of the services.
Okay. I'm saying that, I'm asking that because if you go to page 2, line 22, where it says, because the ODS charge cap government overtime remains unfunded. So we're to say that it's not being funded by the general fund.
Correct.
Okay. Who handles the funding right now? Where does that money go to when it's charged or when it's paid?
When the officers perform their services, payment is remitted to the agency. The agency processes the payment and forwards the payment to DOA for processing and payment.
Okay. So basically, it's for what is charged. You're only being paid what is charged, and then from what is charged, and then what is paid out, basically, so $2 go in, $2 go out.
Yes.
To the officer. There's no administrative fee, there's no...
I think there's a $2 administrative fee that's charged in addition to the officer's salary.
So that's included in the billing to
Yes.
the carrier? Okay, so,
Yeah.
so it's $3 in, $2 out, something like that,
Yes.
right? Oh, what is, can you define to me what is regular working hours?
Regular working hours for customs is 8 to 5. That's the regular working hours for the Port Authority. For the airport, it's a 24-hour operation. So the airport is the only section that is 24 hours. The rest are just 8 to 5.
Okay, so when we're talking about regular working hours, and then we go back to, I guess when we start, and from on page 3, line 20, where you strike about upon special request on Sundays, holidays, or between hours of 5 p.m. of any other day and 6 a.m. of the following day. Are you referring specifically to, in this case, the Port Authority?
Yes. And cargo.
And cargo. Okay, well, because we may want to be able to tighten up that language a little bit, because it appears, there's nothing here that says any. So, excluding passengers arriving in the airport and passengers arriving Guam via ocean vessels. So, if a passenger, if there is a passenger ship that arrives on Sunday, what happens there?
That's charged with the ODS.
That's charged to the ODS. Okay. Again, I'm just wanting to make sure that this language is tight enough so that there's no gap here when it talks about who and when can be charged, and when it can become relevant, if you will. Okay. Now, Mr. Miola, you mentioned that the $275 per day cap, that's based, first off, it's a cap. It's not necessarily based on an individual's current rate, hourly rate.
That's correct.
Okay. So
that was a cap that was an amount that was implemented when the statute was first passed 20 years ago.
Okay. What's the average amount of time that an officer would work ODS in a day?
It really all depends. Now, the program is not, it's for all officers with the exception of the chief. However, if officers elect not to participate in the program, then the pool of officers actually shrinks. So there could be occurrences when an officer who is off, because the next available officer is on duty at the airport, may not be able to, where it's going to be need to be called to fulfill the service requests, for example, on a Sunday, when our air freight office is closed and there is an increase in cargo activity coming into Guam.
So that could still be the case, even if you were to lift the cap. The officer would rather take his day off than work ODS, right? I mean, there's nothing here that basically compels the off-duty officer to.
No, it's a volunteer program.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then going back to the question, what is the average time that an officer would spend ODS in a day?
On average, based on our stats, maybe about 2 hours to perform a service. And it again, the type of service, it depends on the type of service that's being requested by the importer or the carrier.
Okay. You want to say something? Okay. And the reason why I'm asking is that $275 a day, if you divide that by 8 hours, that comes up to $34.37 an hour. And that's an 8-hour day. That's if an individual performs ODS for 8 hours. So even if you were to say that the officer on average would work 2 hours, you know, my direct instruction, my DI math would say that's somewhere about $137 an hour.
Yeah, that's about right. But also, Senator, the program of the ODS program, it's also driven again by the importers and the carriers. Obviously, cargo moving in and out of Guam happens all the time, and one of the advantages of this is that you get immediate service. It's sometimes, for example, an aircraft that come in, the importer was just found out that there's perishable cargo on board. They're requesting for quick service because they too have to call in their employee who's off, and they're going to want them to clear it as soon as possible. So to allocate another 8-hour period or additional time so that we can properly staff somebody to come in and clear it, they pay for that convenience for the quick service, and it also makes it advantageous for the officer because they could be called in within a time frame of an hour and a half to come in and fulfill the service request based on our program guidelines within the agency on who's going to be called next.
Okay. Madam Chair, I only have 12 seconds. That's all. My questions go second round, okay?
Maybe perhaps I can caveat off of that, Senator. So you asked, 2 hours is not going to equate to $275 in one day. One of the biggest frustrations we run into is that our officers are consistently working because of the lack of the number of personnel available to work overtime, that they could be working 3 to 4 inspections within a day that would actually bring them well over $275. So if they worked already 2 and they're called for a third one, but they're only able to work like a half hour to an hour, then we would have to try and find somebody to replace them because they already surpassed that $275 cap. And so what happens is that it compounds the issues with the administrative officer at the airport because now he has to go out and find a replacement officer to finish the inspection that technically, if there were no cap, the officer that's currently performing the off-duty service inspection would complete it without any issues and without impacting the operations or creating an environment where you have an unfunded mandate.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Senator Perez, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon. So I was just looking over some of the information regarding the usage of ODS. Would you say that there's sufficient staffing to accommodate the requests for off-duty services?
Well, currently, based on our numbers of officers who are available to work the program, there are days when we have no issues, but then quite often we find ourselves in situations where you go through the off-duty service list 3 or 4 times, and then you're left at the end of the day sometimes having to send personnel who are on duty, like for human remains, they have to get cleared, right? We have people who just have to do it. We have to bite the bullet, and we find other ways. So these are some of the external impacts that we have because the pool of officers is reducing itself because many years ago we had over 220 officers. Today, although we have a recruitment which will increase, we only have 120 something, 128, 128, 108. I stand corrected. So what we're hoping to accomplish here is that if you remove this $275 cap, it kind of rectifies the situation by allowing the officer who is currently performing an inspection to be able to readily finish his inspection without having to worry that, in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to reach my 275 cap, but I still have 2 hours of work left on a 40-foot container. And then what happens is that If I'm the officer and I call the airport, you have to find a replacement and they're already short. That just compounds the issue by having to try and figure out what to do. And a lot of our officers have to contend with, well, I will stay and and we don't have government overtime funding available. Then we agree that, okay, we'll give you some comp time off. And the thing is, that's not the way this program is supposed to work. The intention of the program is to allow for those individuals who want expedited services to be able to pay for it without having to worry about whether or not the officer is going to reach some sort of cap that was placed like 20 years ago when we weren't experiencing any of these issues with the cap.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. The other thing is the plant inspection. So it was basically deleted from, or at least the bill proposes to delete that from law. Is the customs officer going to be doing the inspections for plant inspections, or how is this going to be handled?
Well, currently, all our officers are collaborators, and so really it's a redundancy. We're already performing the work, so it's kind of like it's visible in the law, and that because we're already by law delegated to perform the quarantine services and the plant protection services, it's a redundancy that, you know, if it's obsolete, then take it out.
So yeah, it wasn't clear in the bill, so maybe perhaps we can make some language, put some language in there saying that the duties also include plant inspection and quarantine.
Yes.
Okay. I think those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Shelton, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to the panel for being here today. I don't have any questions at this time. I'll save it for the next round. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Speaker Barnes, do you have any questions?
Madam Chair. I too don't have any questions for this round, but I may have one on the second round regarding the non-performance of services for the next round.
Thank you, Madam Vice
Thank you.
Speaker. Senator Brown, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yes, I do. I just want to ask, and I know Senator Blas had asked this question, but your hours for your department is 8 to 5? Is that the regular hours? You don't have different shifts?
As I mentioned earlier, Senator, the airport is a 24-hour operation.
Okay.
The other sections like the port is 8 to 5.
Yeah, that I have to clarify and correct. I'm not aware the port is an 8 to 5 operation. I mean, the ships don't come in from 8 to 5. They come at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock in the evening. The gangs are there to perform the unloading of the vessels 24 hours a day if needed. So, I mean, maybe the administrative operations are, but that doesn't stop the clock and the, you know, recording of hours and the work that's being performed and the cargo that's being unloaded. That's constantly recorded. So it's not an 8 to 5 operation.
From a customs standpoint, we identify it as an 8 to 5.
And why?
Because
why,
we don't
is
have
that?
vessels that comes in every day. I mean, I can understand we have vessels that will come in twice a week, but not every day do we have vessels. So why are we going to put an officer down at the port for 24 hours when there's no vessel there?
So your logic is that 8 to 5, that's it, because there's only certain days of the week you're going to have a vessel come in?
So that's why the law is flexible, that when vessels coming after regular hours, then ODS will come into the picture.
Well, because, you know, the need of your customer base of having perishable goods is pretty standard. Probably most shiploads coming in have perishable goods, things that, you know, your customers are going to want to get as soon as possible, especially if they're in competition with other businesses that might be providing similar items for sale.
Yes.
So it's not going to be an exception that they're going to want to have these, you know, have access to their cargo. when it does come in. I think the concern I would have is just wanting to make sure the process is not abused, because I was at the port for 6 years, and
I'm pretty sure that we do monitor the arrivals down at the port, and of course, yes, and the challenge that we have at the port is that although vessels will come in, but a lot of the importers are, for example, produce that are coming in. We can entertain so much during the day, but some of these importers will request, even if their schedule is, let's say, after lunch. A lot of them will say, "Can you please provide us services before lunch, because we want to make sure that the produce are moved out into the."
And that makes all the sense in the world. I mean, that's what they're in the business of doing. It's costing them certainly to bring the cargo in, and I'm sure they would want to access it, because we don't know how long, it may have been out there, the transportation time, how many days, and the length of how long that perishable item or items are going to survive. I just think we need to look at it in a different way, because even though you're saying it's intermittent, I think we'd like to look, certainly I would like to see a better procedure, because I want to see some standardization in the government with regards to how these hours are dealt with. I go back in my recollection before we created the Utilities Commission to oversee the Guam Power Authority and Guam Waterworks Authority. I recall situations where we had the pump operator at the time. Was earning $38,000 a year as a base salary, but with overtime, add that to $125,000. And then I'm beginning to wonder if I'm in the wrong profession. I should be that pump operator watching that pump so I can charge every hour. Not that the duty is not important, but I think most people would look at that certain percentage of overtime as excessive versus the base pay. And I think we just want to ensure there's no abuse, because there has been, let's not kid ourselves, there has been abuse. There's incentive, particularly for your higher ranking officers that we would see down there doing these kind of inspections. Maybe they think the junior officers that have all the energy and, drive starting their careers, I guess they don't want to go down there and do those 2 o'clock inspections. But the senior officers, with their aching bones and, their 28, 20, 30-year career, they're ready to go down there because their hours that are being charged is higher because they earn more. So you got to wonder, right? And I want to make sure that while we're doing this, there's no situation that's going to be there that the customer base and the ratepayers are not being taken advantage of, because they are in a situation where, by nature of what they're bringing in, there is a sense of urgency of wanting to get that process and get it to wherever its respective destination is.
Thank you, Senator. So one of the things that we did talk about internally was perhaps creating several different additional hours of work at both the Port Authority of Guam, at the air cargo. And one of the things that we have to consider is that if you're looking at cost efficiency currently as it stands with 108 officers, in order to appropriately man, let's say, the maritime section, you would probably need, I'm guessing, at least 3 officers plus 1 supervisor per shift. So that's 2 additional supervisors and maybe 6 to 10 bodies additionally. When you contrast that with what we're asking for, it's very cost effective, because we're not putting any of the funding responsibilities on the government of Guam per se. It's an end user based pay-as-you-go. So if you don't use the service, then you don't pay for it. Now, going back to the control measures, we have control measures in place. And we also have a policy that identifies strictly what you can and cannot do. And we have provisions not just with DOA, but internally, to make sure that we follow the guidelines that are set forth that allow us to provide the service. We can't just provide a service without any guidelines or any framework. We already have the framework. What we found in the last 20 years is that this $275 cap, if there was no cap 20 years ago, we would not be here today to ask for consideration to remove it, because what we're finding is that we went from 220 plus officers down to 108, and we're slowly getting there by hiring recruit cycles. The challenge we're running into right now is the fact that when you're going to hire people to come on board, even today, we're still waiting to hire the recruits, right? So it'll take them anywhere between 6 months or a year. 6 months if they already have basic law enforcement academy experience, and then we give them 6 months of in-house training. A whole year if they have to start from ground zero. And during that time, while we're waiting, people they still demand services for their goods. They're still waiting. They want a competitive edge to be able to put their products out. And so far what we found is that the importers and the consignees are ready, willing, and able. What we're finding is that they're frustrated when Officer Vince Perez has to say, well, I made my third hour and I'm already at $280, so now the government owes me $5. Now I have to call the airport to have them replace me, and now the consignee also has to wait an additional amount of time to wait for a guy to come in to replace me, and then that guy might say, well, you know, I need to double check certain things, and then that just adds more cost. Whereas if it was just me and there was no cap, I could really just make sure that I do the job and complete it. A lot of times what we find is that if we are in the middle of an inspection and we reach the cap, we kind of have to shut down. We have to take all our reports, all the invoices, all the receipts, compile it, submit it, and then let the next officer know that, hey, we found like 3 instances of seizures that we need to put on a chain of custody, submit it, and it needs to get transported. And these are also unfunded costs because now we took a seizure outside of the time that we took to inspect an item, and that now is attributed to government overtime because it's no longer part of what was the process. So going back to $275 cap, if we were able to appropriately just remove that cap, I mean, for me personally, I look at the cap and I'm like, where did this cap come from? I mean, look at it. Maybe back then they were thinking nobody's ever going to get to $275, and this was over 20 years ago when this cap was made. So all we're asking for is that if we appropriately take that cap, it actually would go a long way towards rectifying the situation that we're in now, where we have to like close up shop, call another guy in, and then start process all over.
Appreciate your input with regards to that. I mean, it probably was put in place back then because maybe that was, and it is a legitimate concern because let's not kid ourselves. I mean, you know, the abuse of overtime in the government of Guam is not foreign. Sorry, I don't know, my mic here. Must be just mine. Maybe it's going to get shut off again. It's not unheard of. It's not an uncommon practice, and I think we're wanting to ensure that there's no abuse, be it $275 or 20 hours or whatever the time limitation or money limitation that's put in place. I think that's the concern. If we were to support this, then, you know, I'd probably want a little more than every 6 months reporting, and that's something that we could track to ensure that there is no abuse and that the general public, who ultimately, even though you have your consignees, ultimately it's the people of Guam that are paying these additional costs. And we just want efficiency, and we want to ensure there's no abuse, because traditionally, even within customs, let's not kid ourselves, it's been an issue of concern. So I know I'm running out of time, and I'll wait for the next round. Thank you. Thank you for responding to my questions.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Atta, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the panel for being here this afternoon. On page 5, line 11 and line 16, can you tell me what are the, you got the administrative surcharge of $2, and I think that's the surcharge you were mentioning earlier. And then you have the customs administrative processing fee, which is $8. What is the difference between the two, Section D and Section E?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The $2 fee goes directly to DOA, and the $8 that we're proposing, that is to remain with the agency to accommodate the hours that that individual is putting in to provide the accounting and billing of all this ODS charges.
Also, Senator, if I could also add, is that currently the way the process works is that there's only one administrative processing fee, and we actually have personnel who are assigned at the agency who work and process the off-duty services, invoices, and collections, And so there was no consideration years ago that there was additional costs to the agency that were never considered. So right now that also is an unfunded mandate that we're looking to rectify.
I see. So how did the $8 figure come about, being that DOA is only getting $2 out of the,
I'll give you $8.
they get a separate $2 fee and you guys get a $8. So what's the, how did that fee come up?
The $8 was derived from the like what the chief mentioned. It was determined from our civilian employee actually processing the ODS. So she does the handling of receiving the money, issuing out billings, reconciling, transmitting the payments down to DOA, and ensuring that all the other administrative as well as payroll needs are carried out for the program. So actually the $8 would actually fund that person so that, again, it won't be an obligation of CQA's funds, but it'll be paid for by the user, the overtime requester. So that's how we determine a reasonable amount of $8 for that processing fee for the entire year for the personnel costs and other things like ink, computer, all the other expenditures for that civilian employee.
Okay. So then previously, when it was just Section D, Customs wasn't receiving anything at all.
Yeah, those funds are attributed for DOA processing also. So what we wanted to do is just make sure that we weren't missing out on anything as we're talking about trying to make things much more efficient and effective. And so when you're talking about unfunded mandates, we're trying to reduce the unfundedness of the mandate by providing a mechanism where the end user would be paying as appropriate for miscellaneous costings performed by the officer.
Oh, okay, I see. Madam Chair, that's the only question I have on this round. Perhaps on round 2 I'll have another one. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Atta. Senator Duenas, questions or comments for the panel?
Sidus Masi, Madam Chair, and thank you for the panel for being here. I guess where my challenge comes in, along with many of the questions that have been asked, is when I go to the fiscal note on this bill. And even BBMR, and I guess maybe a review from the fiscal team, shows that there's really no data unless we had data from you in terms of the impact. And so I guess maybe I'll go back and see if I can try to pull something out here in my line of questioning. So you say that basically the process of the charge is processed through DOA, and then is that remitted then back to CQA?
Okay, so when the off-duty service officer performs a service, he takes an invoice. The invoice is filled out by the consignee, and then you identify how much is owed, and then he takes a collection. He brings a collection to the office. The clerical staff at the office will compile all of that, submit along with documentation necessary for DOA for their accounting to input it, and then it goes into an account, which eventually comes out as a government check to the officer who performed the service. So at the end of the day, there's no government funding supposedly to pay for, that should be used to pay for a service for an end user, but we find that we have positions within the agency that have to, by virtue of reviewing and submitting, have to perform, and it's not appropriately accounted for in the transmittal.
And see, that's, I guess, one of the challenges I see. So you're basically talking about a direct pay compensation to an officer providing the charge.
It's not direct per se. What happens is that we take all the money and it gets deposited into the Guam Customs and Quarantine Inspection Services Fund account. So it actually has to be remitted by us into a government account for accounting and just making sure that everything is all in. Because otherwise, if you're paying, if the importer, the consignee is paying it directly, that opens an environment or creates an environment where there's possible abuse. I could be telling you as a customs officer, just give me $600 cash, and really the amount due was like $300. But so what it is that because we have hourly rates and we have policies that are in place, when it goes through a process, the clerk who's actually conducting a review actually reports to us whether or not the consignee paid enough, or whether or not the officer appropriately reported his hourly rate, because sometimes they underreport their rate. They're supposed to be collecting more. And on the flip end, they might be charging less because they forgot their rate. And so what happens is that there has to be some sort of review and accountability. So we have different levels in which when it gets down to getting processed, the clerk who's getting the information, a lot of the time she'll come over to see either the supervisor or up the chain through myself or the director and say, this invoice is short. It could be 5 cents, it could be $5, it could be whatever. And so what we do is that we have to make sure that we contact either the supervisor or the officer directly and let them know that, hey, this is the issue, you got to go out and rectify it.
Yeah, okay, let me try this. What percentage would you say of your actual services that you provide are such that are captured by this ODS?
The off-duty services that are performed, each and every transaction is recorded. So if you're asking, is it 100%? So 100% of it is recorded into like an invoice and submitted.
I guess what I'm trying to say, Mr. Perez, here is I'm having a hard time with whether the cap is the problem or the manpower is the problem because of the issue of passing it along. That's what I'm having trouble with here. I don't have enough data here to work with in terms of what's the real issue, because the problem I have in the end is, what does this look like if we end up with ODS charges after we remove the cap, and it's exponentially higher for those who are requesting the service, and now people have sticker shock when they're going, maybe if they're dealing with produce and perishables and all these things that are happening, and you know the businesses just say, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. The ODS charge is now gone up 400%.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around whether this is a manpower issue, whether it's a cap issue, what is it?
Okay, so I see where you're going with this. Right now, currently as it stands, Senator, we are understaffed. We used to, in our heyday, and this is years ago, back in the 90s, we had 220 plus officers. Fast forward to today, 108. We have more mandates. September 11 happened. So we got all these little things going on. We got people filling programs and double filling. And so what happens is that we have a mission at the border. And so this service that we're providing is an end user thing. And so what you're concerned about is that whether or not people are going to run amok. The way I see it, the more people that we hire in relation to our needs of the border, you're going to see less and less calls for service as time progresses. You're not going to see people coming out of the woodwork to say, we're going to work it. And already, many years ago, the Chief of Customs used to be able to work off-duty service. It was called carrier off-duty services at the time. I mean, if necessary, we could put certain provisions in our own regulations, but I believe that we have enough currently to allow us to be able to keep an eye on the pulse of of how much is being paid out, what the officers are getting paid. But right now, we're doing a disservice to the community and to our officers by allowing this cap to continue, because we're creating more steps to be able to perform the service.
Let me try this then too. Is anybody not getting paid that's providing an ODS service at this point? Is any officer going without pay or without the... Because the services are being performed within the manpower that you have.
Yes.
That's why I'm still having trouble with the cap being the problem when it seems like the manpower is the problem.
It actually is a twofold problem. It's a manpower issue, right? So like I said, going back to what I said earlier, we're less than half of where we need to be. So we need more people. It's just if you look at the economics of it all, we have policies in place to allow it. And then to your point where you're saying, are they not getting paid? There are times when, because of how the process is with the agency and inputting and working with the Department of Administration to ensure that the payroll timesheets and everything are in. So you have to recall that in the government of Guam, every 2 weeks is a pay period. And so what happens is that the payroll clerk or the clerk that's taking care of the off-duty services also has to contend with subsequent weeks where regular pay periods are being paid. And then the other thing is, like, if the money is not in the account because the officer did not submit the invoice and the funding in time, and the payroll ended or the payroll week ended, that person's not going to get paid for another 2 weeks. There are times, of course, where hiccups happen. I mean, that's understandable, but we're trying to work through it. But imagine if we had enough personnel, support personnel, and going back to the administrative costs, we could easily have said like $16 or $20 to pay for 2 people to be able to mandate this program, to run the program much more effectively. But we're very prudent in trying just to determine, at least get a baseline, and then maybe in a few years we'll revisit it. But for us to sit back after 20 years of looking at a cap and then we're consistently biting the bullet just to perform a service, to me, it's like, it's unheard of. I mean, we're at a point where we need more people. We need to have much more efficient, effective government, like Joanne Brown was saying, and we all agree. But in order for us to get there, we need to take that first step. And one of the first steps, I believe, is really to just remove the cap.
Yeah, I'm hearing 2 things here, and that's maybe that's why I don't know if I'm not getting it or what's going on here. But it sounds to me like the removal of the cap is also one of the solutions that's being proposed here on a manpower issue. Because if the manpower was there, the cap wouldn't be a problem because you've had enough staff to cover. If a shift stops, another shift picks up, and whatever else. I mean, the dollars and cents, because there's not enough data here, it's just not coming through clear, at least to me.
That's true, Senator. If you're saying that if we had more manpower, yes, the ODS would be reduced. Yes. And the ODS provides for the people that are off. They have already performed their 8 hours, but when ODS is needed, then these are the people that will be called upon to come back and provide these services.
Have vendors ever not been able to receive their goods because of the fact that the cap is preventative and you cannot perform the duty in terms of... I'm trying to understand the relationship here.
Yes. To answer your question, quite simply, yes. So many times the importers or the consignees who are making the requests often ask, why can't we just pay you to complete the job? I'm sorry, but by law, there's a cap. And so what am I supposed to do? Well, you can wait until 08 the next day for the cargo or the maritime facility to open, and then based on the availability of the shift worker, we'll send somebody to your area. And a lot of the times, many of these importers or consignees are willing to pay the for the service. And really, at the end of the day, it's not impacting the general public, it's impacting the end user. And so all we're trying to do is trying to find a way to be able to provide the service, because if we stick with the cap and our salaries in the next 3 years, if there's another study done and they find that the rates for the officers need to go up, it could be on their first half hour that they make this 275 cap, because if you do a review of how many officers are available to perform the off-duty service, and keep in mind that these officers have to work at least 8 hours initially on their regular duty. They don't just get called to get off-duty service. The only time they get called for off-duty service is after the first 8 hours, or if they're working on their day off. And so,
Yeah, Mr. Perez, I sympathize with the fact that it's not the general public, it's the end user, but let's be cognizant of the climate we're in right now.
yes.
We've got inflation through the roof. We've got costs of goods that are just so exponentially high.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want us sitting here 3-4 months from now and these goods have gone up by such a large amount, because the end user are the products that people are buying at the store
Yes.
that they can't even afford to buy now.
I understand your rationale, Senator. Now, right now, the rates of our officers have already gone up. And so by retaining the cap, would that negatively impact the capability? I mean, it's the same thing. We're still having to pay to keep up because the rates of the officers have changed. And now what we're finding is that the officers are reaching this cap much more quickly than 20 plus years ago. 20 years ago, we had no issue.
Let me try this then. Do you think in any way, on the record, that this change in removing the cap has any potential of exponentially increasing the cost of the fees associated with the inspections?
It's an end user. It will not have, so in what context are you looking at?
I'm an end user. I'm going to go to the store tonight and buy food for dinner, okay? If I'm going to buy tomatoes, lettuce, cucumbers, if I'm going to buy beef, if I'm going to buy something that might be coming in a container that needs to be expected, that something hits an ODS rate, sorry guys, we can redo this at 08 tomorrow, but
yeah.
If this cap is gone, we'll stick around for another 3-4 hours, and all of a sudden now, the vendors and all those that are bringing wholesalers and they're saying, guys, we're just passing this cost along because the rate was lifted. There's a manpower issue at customs, and this is all gone. And now, if there's a 12-15% increase,
Mm-hmm.
it's not it's cost of doing business. End users, me as you as everybody else, who's going to go shopping to put food on the table for our family.
Yeah, I could understand. Now, one of the things that you're looking at is you're looking at conditions of extremes. So extreme is that you open up the potential so that the officer is there for 8 to 10 hours. In our line of work, the amount of time that it takes on average is like about 1, maybe 2 hours. In some cases, like with FedEx and DHL, those mail carriers and freight services, those can take anywhere between 5 to 8 hours, depending. And you have to remember that the officers, as they look through the invoice and the manifest, they're looking at making sure that everything's appropriately labeled, identified, that the costing is there, and then they're also looking for prohibited or restricted articles. So in the extreme, yes. If you're saying in the law of extremes, is that a potential? Yes. But we currently have control measures in place to be able to allow for it. And if you're looking at whether or not it's going to deter you because the utility you get from buying a can of Spam went up by 0.1 cent, then there's something wrong with the law, because the 275 is you know.
The problem is, Mr. Paris, is that's what we're doing here right now. We're extrapolating this with no data in front of it. Something this technical should be data-driven.
We do have data that has been submitted to the Office of the Speaker, and perhaps maybe you can take a look at that during your leisure, but we do have information that identifies at least daily the number of officers who performed it, the amount that it's cost, and other information. I mean, we didn't come here and just come up with, say, hey, let's come up with legislation to remove the cap. There had to be a reason why we arrived at that particular idea. And that was because we find that, number one, we're short-staffed. Number two, the cap is approached faster. Before, in the old days, it took like maybe almost a week.
I know I have another round to do my follow-up, but still, Mr. Paris, let's be honest here. There is not enough. There's enough information to go on in terms of the officer time, the cost based on the cap, but it still sounds like we're solving a manpower problem by removing a cap so we can hire more people, whereas Customs should already have these amount of officers to provide this service, and the cap wouldn't be a problem. So I'm going to have to reconcile that, and I think it's a fair question. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll save the rest of my questions for the next round.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. That was very good questions that you had. Senator Torres, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very much in support of this piece of legislation, and I think the reason that it's necessary is this cap, as I understood from the public hearing, prohibits the continuation of services once they've reached that $275 per day per officer threshold when they go to inspect. And while I can appreciate the concerns about whether this what effect this has on prices, that in and of itself is going to be a determined factor by the retailer in the competitive nature of business, how they are going to adjust their prices. But fundamentally what this bill does is it allows for those people who are shipping goods to Guam either by air or by sea to receive their goods and have them cleared as efficiently as possible. And if they so elect, and the whole point of it is it's voluntary. The shipper can request the off-duty services at the fee that's stated, and the officers performing the inspections can volunteer to perform off-duty services or not. So it's clearly a voluntary basis, and I think what is most important is initially this was implemented to provide services to Guam's customer shipping and cargo stakeholders. It was also, from the public hearing, said to have been put in place to avoid officer fatigue. That's why they had that cap. It was officer fatigue and trying to say that you're not going to work more than X number of, or the equivalent of the value of your hours at $275 per day. But I think what the point that I want to make here is, in the opening statement, the sponsor brought up that it was a way to kind of address a problem that was almost a catch-22, because the cap was prohibiting them from performing the services. It was tapping into the overtime costs that bled into the government of Guam that you now bore, that you can't pass through because of the cap. And it also caused where you didn't pay overtime, compensatory overtime, which then took officers off of their shift duty, and it just compounded the shortage. So as I understood, that's what it is. But the point I'm just trying to make here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is sometimes the need for clearance is so critical that that would be the reason for a person to request off-duty services clearance, correct? And it could be situations where there's critical parts needed for repair of equipment, and it could be equipment for anything. It could be life-saving equipment. It could be medicines that are being air flown in that need to be cleared right away. And so those are the things that I think we need to highlight, that I know from businesses that they would prefer to pay top dollar to get their critical goods cleared right away, because sometimes the delay is 2 to 3 days. If the queue is long and the officers are not available, but mostly the unavailability of officers is compounded by, one, fees being unnecessarily assumed, or OT assumed by the government, where it could be a pass-through now to the shippers, correct? And so that's one thing. It's compounded by that. So what this bill is it seems to be a practical fix to what is a 20-year-old policy that doesn't meet the demands of present day, where now we know that because of our remote location in Guam, sometimes access to those goods is the difference between today versus 3 or 4 days from now is so critical that they would pay whatever it is that you charge for them to clear that equipment. So is that a fair estimate in terms of the practicality of this bill, and that it actually goes to not only address fiscal impacts, now it eases you up so it's not your burden to pay, you can pass it through to the requesters of the ODS. It also now will impact your overtime and comp time that you're paying to clear these vessels, where it could be a pass-through. And then it also may generate more funds for you if you can pass these through and collect it from the users of ODS. Are all three of those points valid, Mr. Barreto or Mr. Perez?
Well, let me just expand on saying that aside from removing the 275 cap, you have to also think that it tries to mitigate the problem in trying to delay the shipment. So what we're trying to do is we're making sure that if we provide the service to the importers, that we do it in a timely basis and not stop in the middle because the cap has been impacted by the law, and it causes the delay in the movement of goods. So I will say that it's also important to point out that by removing the cap, it lessens the delay process of clearing the goods at the border.
Because the container will have to be cleared once it's opened, is that correct? You don't close it up and then
That's
start
right.
again? Okay,
Yes.
so that's the dilemma. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres, for bringing a lot of clarity to some of the questions that were asked. Speaker Talahi, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you, yes. Thanks to Customs, yeah, I did send them a request for some more information after the public hearing, and they did send me a letter. I'm trying to post that on the chat as soon as I get the right one. So that was off-duty service statistics for calendar year 2021. It lists every day of the week, the date, the number of officers assigned to air cargo ODS, number of officers assigned to maritime ODS, the totals that were incurred for that day, and then for each air cargo maritime, and then all overall totals. And some other information, so thank you for that. Yeah, I guess if I could just start off with Mr. Byrne, do you have anything to add to this discussion? Is there anywhere else in the government where we are charging fees to customers based on salary rates of our employees?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. No, not that I recall. This is a unique situation, and I guess that's why we're sitting here trying to resolve this situation.
Do the 3 times their rate, does that cover their benefits Do you pay them benefits for this time that they are working?
Well, every time an hourly rate is paid, benefits accrue. And benefits basically are the pension contribution plus the Medicare contribution.
So when you get this, the money from customs, and then you pay the officers 3 times their salary, right, or whatever the rate is, are you getting enough to cover the benefits as well?
It's really hard to say, but if I could address it in this manner, the actual accounting for this is through a special fund. In 2021, the general fund had to, there was actually a loss of 75,000 on this general fund, on this fund, and the general fund had to subsidize it. It was one of the funds that had to be subsidized by the general fund to the tune of about 48,000. In a previous year, previous years, there was actually a positive balance on this fund. So this reversal and this apparent accrual of expenses in excess of revenues seems to have occurred in 2021 and not before.
Can you tell us why?
It's very hard. We're actually all looking for data to support all this. I guess there could be several reasons, but probably the 2 most probable reasons are, one, that the salaries did increase in 2021 beyond the amounts that were contemplated when this legislation and this cap was originally established, or 2, the amount that was actually collected failed to compensate for the full amount of the expense.
Yeah, and how could that happen?
That's something that I would have to defer to customs. I see no receivables in this account, so information was not provided to DOA for the uncollected amounts. That's not to say there was a large amount of uncollected amounts, but as customs just testified, they're the ones that are responsible for collecting these fees.
All right, so if I could ask customs, when you make your billing and you deliver it to the private carriers or industry, do you include benefits? When you say 3 times their rate, or this language, does that include benefits? Are we collecting any benefits?
Thank you, Senator. Maybe also I need to clarify one thing. When we refer to the 3 times the hourly rate, the 3 times the hourly rate only applies to the first minute or fraction thereof to the first hour. Any performance after that time is paid at time and a half, so it depreciates down to half of that. And so one of the things as far as like any collected monies that are going in is paid into the Department of Administration, and the officers themselves would elect to pay for like retirement. They would be responsible for paying the retirement contributions. So the consignee is not paying any additional for any additional benefit, if I'm not mistaken, and that and I think Medicare is probably taken out, so the officer would make sure that they turn in whatever they have, but they're responsible for paying. Like if I wanted to include, let's say I made $30,000 a year in overtime based on my off-duty service, but I elected not to pay in, I'm not going to be, that won't be calculated towards my salary because I decided not to add that in. Otherwise, I'd be responsible for paying the contribution. I'd be paying for the government's contribution as well as the employee's contribution on that part.
Mr. Byrne, I've never heard of that either. I'm sorry, I don't mean anything badly, but can you just explain that? So can we employees can elect not to be covered under retirement for certain hours?
No, there are some, not currently. There are a few people in the old pension plan that have a non-accountable type of retirement contribution, but it's very, very few people, and most of the people, both in the defined benefit plan and certainly in the defined contribution plan, must contribute based upon the salary, the dollar amount of the salary they receive.
All right, so that's my concern, is that we're saying we're going to charge 3 times or time and a half. So we charge that, but it doesn't include all the other benefits. I'm not sure. Maybe, hopefully we can get a clear answer on that. Maybe that's why we're not matching up in the end. But my big question, of course, is, and it sounds like from the previous discussion with the other colleagues, is that, so if you had enough personnel, obviously, we don't need this, right? That you would just shift them out to cover the 4 carriers that are coming in per week and cover those inspections as part of your regular duties.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So if we had enough to like, let's say, man all 3 shifts over at the air cargo and 3 shifts over at the maritime office facility, you would need to do a probably cost comparison, and would it be cost effective to hire like, let's say, 15 people to operate down at the maritime section and maybe 10 additional people to work to cover a 24-hour shift? Or is it more cost effective to be able to, especially in today's environment that we're experiencing very, very low officers on duty because the environment is conducive to leave us to go federal service, is that it would cost us a whole lot more to be able to man 24/7, 365 days a year, all the ports of entry, and this would also include, like, let's say, Anderson Air Force Base. So in our experience, having the end user pay for a service that is only provided for those who want it, because we already have a venue for people who want to come in between the hours of 8 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the evening to be able to get their items. So when importers are coming in, they're paying for a convenience. And a lot of times when you're dealing with perishables, it's like time is money, and they want their goods, they want it now, and they don't want to have to deal with any mitigating circumstances. And to me, it's like this 275. And I'm sorry, I apologize. We keep talking about 275, but really that's why we're here today. And if this cap was removed, we would be continuing on our way. Yes, we need to improve our legislation and our mandates, but on the other end, if we were to try and man all the ports of entry, it would cost us a whole lot more than the services that we're currently providing to those who pay for an end user service.
Well, it doesn't seem that you need 24/7 for all of these places. You just need a little bit more, right? You said you're covering the airport 24/7, you're handling that, and that most of this ODS, well, you said most of the ODS was for the port, but on the charts that you gave us, there's also air cargo ODS, quite significant.
Madam Speaker, just to clarify, the airport staffing is dedicated to the passenger terminal, and that's all locked in with the passenger inspection fee that's up there. It's mandating the individuals there. The airport, the air freight side is separate from the passenger air terminal, and that office is operated 8 to 5. There are instances where cargo is coming in outside the normal business hours, and even outside normal. I mean, you're talking about 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and some of these instances may not be enough to justify the staffing of personnel to just clear 4 or 5, 6 consignees. So, that also is, that we have to take that into consideration. Definitely even at the seaport. I know that we provided you with the number of officers that were assigned there. Also with our experiences, when aircraft do arrive with cargo and they're coming in, sometimes you have multiple importers that want to clear at the same time. So you could have 10 consignees, all want a competitive advantage, and all want to clear right when it's ready to be released by the carriers. So those are just some of the things that that we want to share with you about, especially how you view this the statistics that we provided you.
Yeah, right. Because I'm glad you explained that, because some of these say, like in one day, 30 officers were assigned for air cargo alone. 30. And then, yeah, you got similar numbers over on the other side. But it's like, 34, 22, 26 in a day. Yeah, that's amazing to me. That's like, all right. So if the business does not avail of the ODS service, they will get service next day in the 8 to 5. So this is like a VIP service that they're willing to pay. Expedited,
Yes.
right? And so my only issue with that is, of course, it's just government policy. Normally we set fees for our customers in advance, and we set a fee, and we tell them this is the fee for inspection. And, even this is the expedited fee or whatever. And it just feels uncomfortable to me that some customers will be paying, a high salary rate versus a medium salary rate and that. But I understand that's been the policy for a while now, and that they're willing to pay it. Do they, and that you believe that the system is fair for your officers, that they're being assigned, you said there's a list, so that they're assigned on a fair basis, and that everyone has an opportunity, that everybody has an opportunity to get this type of payment over time and accrue it? You sure?
Yes, that's correct.
With the exception of the chief.
But all the other officers are put on this list?
If they elect
If
to
they
participate.
want to. Okay, what about, do you have any issues then that, sounds like there used to be issues with, you've got your officers working on these shifts, right? And then they're allowed to work overtime, but you have no problem with them coming back on duty and feeling refreshed and up to the job. That's not a concern anymore.
It's not a I mean, there are concerns for employee health and safety. Now, one of the things that we want to try to promote is to ensure that the officer, when he leaves us, is able to perform his duty the following day. We don't want an officer to come on board and then get off after an 8-hour shift and then do like 5 different assignments of off-duty service, and then he worked 24 hours in a period. And I believe that's where some of the rationale came from, that if the 275, but I'm only speculating on that. But we also have policy that was put out to ensure, we put out a reminder to our officers to remind them to make sure that we don't want you coming to report for duty if something is impacting your capability. Like it could be your mental health, it could be like maybe you went out and you went to a fiesta and you're not ready to come to work. So in those particular cases, we also account for that when the administrative officer at the airport is calling saying, hey, Officer John Rick or Captain John Rick, do you want to work off-duty service? Is oh man, no, I was at a fiesta and I'm not ready. I'm not up to it. Then they'll appropriately mark that he's declined and the reason why he declined. And so what will happen is that they'll go to the next name on the list and ask. So we are concerned about officer safety and making sure that we're providing adequate service.
So the other thing is that it's because of the raises that were in here, right? So the raises created a greater salary, so you're going to exceed the cap so much sooner.
Yes.
And that's why we need to raise or remove the cap is
Yes.
the argument, because the salaries have gone up. And
Madam Speaker.
oh, okay, thank you. I'll wait for the next round.
All right, we're going to proceed then to the second round of questioning, and after the second round, we will recess and go into the third round, but when we recess, the panel will be excused. So we'll begin the second round of questioning, and we'll start with the same order at the back of the room, and we'll start with Senator Taitagui. Do you have any questions, Senator Taitagui, for the panel or comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm yielding my time to Senator or Speaker Therese Chalahi. When her time comes, so I'll yield my time to her. Thank you.
Okay. May I call on Senator Blas if you have any questions or comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief or Director, what's the difference between overtime and ODS?
Okay, so the difference between the ODS, which is, we call it off-duty service, and the other one is called overtime. When we talk about overtime, we're referring to overtime that is paid out by the government of Guam. It's called government overtime. So with that, we have to allocate funding. We have to put it in our budget and request for funding every fiscal year. Off-duty services are performed on a daily basis, which is not put in a budget because you can't identify how many inspections that somebody is going to request for. So the difference is that the off-duty services is an end user request for service, and the government, the overtime is government overtime, which has accountability and fiscal restraints and requests for budgets and stuff like that done every fiscal year.
Okay, based on that then, so what is your hourly rate for ODS?
So the hourly rate depends on the rate of the officer. So if Vince Perez is making $15, it'll be $15 for his first hour, and if I work 2 hours, the second hour will be time and a half. So, and if John Rick was making $20, it'll be based on that $20 for the 3 times for the first hour, and then time and a half for the second hour. So it all depends. It could be whatever the lowest paid officer is making or the highest paid. It's there's no the control is that we follow a list. So in alphabetical order, we just go down the line.
So conceivably, you can have customer A and customer B on the same day, but customer A will be charged less than customer B, but performing the same service.
Yes, and this is a concept that was modeled after the United States Customs Service, and I believe it was at USDA. This has been in effect since before I came into Customs, and so that's the concept that we've been following. But many years ago, there was no cap. And many years ago, the way it used to work was that we were performing off-duty services even at the Guam International Airport Authority.
Okay, I guess that's where having difficulty wrapping around the concept, okay? I agree with you that the more officers that you have, the less this will problem that will be. And you know that you can have an officer work an 8-hour shift, then 4-hour overtime, then day off, and then ODS, right? At time and a half?
So if I were getting off of a shift, right, like 8 to 5, and then I worked an off-duty service, potentially I could work 2 days of overtime on my weekend. So depending on that, I could easily go over that cap in one day, depending on if I ended up working several consignments. And next thing you know, it's kind of like, I'm going to have to get somebody to replace me.
Okay. So along those lines, does the cap does the amount of overtime you work, let's say you work 2 hours or 3 hours of overtime, is that factored into the 275 per day, or is that separate?
It's factored in. So if you work 2 overtime requests in a given day, that's counted towards the 275 cap.
Okay, so John Rick, let me ask you. Let's say you work an 8-hour shift, right? And then because of you in your shift, you just came across in your last half hour somebody that you're going to have to inspect, so it takes you another 2 hours. That's overtime.
Government overtime.
Oh, government overtime,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's government overtime.
Right.
Then you're on your way home, okay, and the chief calls you and say, John Rick, you're next on the list for ODS. So the 2 hours of overtime
does not account for the off-duty service 275
That's
cap.
what I was getting at. So it does not affect the 275 cap.
No.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Senator Perez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just I'm also wondering, did you do a cost comparison or analysis to see perhaps instituting a swing shift, perhaps, or even a graveyard shift with, versus the continuation of the ODS program? So, I mean, have you looked at the cost comparisons between them? So I guess the idea is that you're called upon to inspect packages, right, whenever the shipment arrives, whether it's in the airport or the port. And did you ever do an analysis of the cost if you were to implement a swing shift, for instance?
Yes, Senator. Let me explain. For example, up at Cargo, back then, when we had enough people, I can manipulate the shift to accommodate the needs of the imports that are coming in within that particular time. But at this point in time, we can't do that because we're really short of people. We only have 104 officers at this point in time. But yes, you're right. If we had the adequate manpower within the agency, we can manage to set up some sort of another shift to accommodate the ODS requests that are coming in.
Would you like to respond?
I think, Senator, if we were to conduct that study, we would really have to evaluate how much volume we're actually clearing. Because like I mentioned to the speaker, if the volume of customers that are going to be served just by having a swing shift or augmenting or having different shifts, if it's only to clear a couple of consignments every other day and to actually house people in that secured area just waiting, that's something we're going to have to examine closely if we were to do a cost comparison study, if it's feasible to even move to opening up a different additional shifts at some of these areas, because we still have volume that comes in during our normal business hours. It's just that there are some consignees or some ODS requesters that, because of when their cargo comes, the time-sensitive nature of their cargo, that they would request for off-duty service. Even my experience, I would ask them, "Why don't you wait for tomorrow?" He goes, "I want to have my merchandise for my customers that are getting ready to go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I can't wait for you guys to open at 8, or I can't wait. I need it now. I gotta provide to my customers."
Do you think that would be popular amongst the staff to have a swing shift? Because, there comes a differential with that. Is that something that would be, the staff would appreciate? Instead of working day shift, they can work the swing shift?
Well, You know, there are a lot of things to consider, and so would employees appreciate that? They probably, to a certain extent, would, but many employees enjoy the benefit of working and participating in the off-duty service program because right now it is strictly volunteer. Some of our officers don't work it, and so sometimes we run into situations where, because of a lack of participation, we have to delegate officers who are getting off shift to perform a service. But these are things, of course, that we can take into consideration, and as we move along, we can, I mean, in a few years' time, maybe that's the environment. But right now, as it stands, it seems like very reasonable. It doesn't seem unreasonable to take that cap and to remove it.
Yeah, I think, yeah, just maybe perhaps, because right now, because of the cap, there is a limit. Have you ever had difficulty covering for any particular shipment coming in because of the cap?
I'm going to defer that to Colonel Francis Farron, who oversees the Inspection and Control Division, because he's the one that's constantly in my office discussing off-duty services and the challenges that he faces.
Yes, Senator, there are challenges when customers call in to clear their cargo, and we've already exhausted the list because many of these folks have already performed maybe 2 overtimes, which brings them up close to the cap. So if they did one more, they're over, so they have to decline. And of the 108 officers that we have, only half of them participate. And of the half, maybe 40 of them are consistent, but it's still voluntary, so when we call them, sometimes they do decline, so the list gets shorter. And then we have to tell the customer if they could just wait maybe a couple of hours until a certain shift ends, and then we may be able to assign somebody to take care of their cargo. But they usually request for a certain time of the day or early morning, and there are times when we have difficulty staffing. So sometimes we can't meet the time that they request for, but often we try to do it the best we can. Sometimes we plead with the officers to at least do this one time, and then sometimes we can convince them to come in and perform the off-duty service. So those are some of the challenges. It's not so much manpower, not so much really, it's how many officers want to participate. So if the pool is smaller and we have a lot of consignees requesting for overtime, then we go through the list a lot quicker. It's not one officer staying for one consignee and maxing out. No, it's usually they get called 2, maybe 3 times that same day, so they meet or they come close or they will go over, so they have to decline, and then we have to go through the list again. So that's basically what happens.
And maybe perhaps I can also caveat, because I think maybe some of the concern is like, we talk about $275 and removing the cap, but perhaps the answer lies in maybe adjusting the cap to take into consideration the 40% law enforcement increase that happened like 10, 11 years ago, and then the additional 18% law enforcement raises that came into effect, and then the 10% hazardous duty. See, all of these things had an impact on an officer's capability. So all of this was adjusted upwards, and the cap itself remained static. So maybe perhaps adding a 68%, because that's how much it costs. It's 40% plus 18% plus 10% comes up to 68. And then maybe put in a provision in there that depending on how the wages go up, depending on what ratio, you just build it into that. But I'm thinking that, simply put, you take into consideration all the impacts that happened in the last 20 years since the implementation of of the bill and this 275 cap.
Thank you. I appreciate that suggestion, because I think, yeah, one of the concerns is that, how do we deal with increasing costs, right? If, would that filter down into the consumers, right? So this is something I'll definitely think about a little bit more. So yeah, thank you for your responses.
Thank you, Senator Paris. Senator Shelton, Vice Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And again, thank you to all the panel members here this afternoon. The only question or inquiry I have is maybe just a verification on page 5, line item C. As I noted, Madam Chair, for non-performance of services, if services have been requested and the officer has reported to work and the services are not performed by reason of circumstances beyond the control of the officers concerned, the requesting party shall be charged in accordance with 7302A on the same basis as though the services actually had been performed during the time the officer was ordered to report for duty and did so report, and the time the officer was notified that the officer's services would not be required. And maybe just a further clarification or explanation, has this been an original provision that was put in? And because I see the changes and the deletions from 73203A and the specification of times, right? Where it's on Sundays, holidays, and upon special request. But maybe just a further clarification so we have a better understanding on what, because you would assume if the performance of the officer wasn't done for unforeseen circumstances, right? I mean, that's not the control of the person requesting that. So maybe just a further clarification from anybody in the panel, please.
Vice Speaker, for the non-performance, it's on the requester. If the officer assigned shows up to the place where service is going to be delivered, and for reasons beyond, of course, the officer's control, the payment of non-performance, the hours first, the officer's hourly rate for the first hour will be paid. Now we do have something in the program where we actually inform the consignee to ensure that they confirm that the services will be needed at the time they requested for. And even up to an hour before the service is going to be performed, if the requester finds out information that service is no longer needed, they can opt out of the request and they will not be billed for even if the officer is already making their way up to the area where they're going to provide the service.
So for an example to that is a scheduled delay in flight or something to that effect. Am I saying that correctly?
You're
okay.
right.
I just wanted to make sure that there was an understanding on why this provision was put in or remained in, because you're asking based on the requester, and then for unforeseen beyond their control, right? Unforeseen circumstance beyond the requester's control, that the services is not performed. And is that fee a flat fee for just noting that, or is it the same as the first hour? The first hour
of the officer. Now, and again, we do advise the requester, the importer, the person requesting the services, to verify that the plane is coming, for example, and that the cargo will be ready at the given at the requested time. So.
But there's also that provision in place that you just said earlier, that up to an hour before, at any time, the requester can cancel out.
Correct. Without
But
charge.
but there's nothing in the provisions here, am I right?
There is nothing. That's just, I believe, our internal policy that you must be there at the time requested. So if you're there and for whatever reason the service is canceled after knowing that the officer's there, then the requester will be
Charged.
responsible for the officer's first hourly rate.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Truly appreciate their answers to this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Senator Brown, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
Yes, thank you very much. I know it was mentioned earlier that we're removing agriculture from this listing. With regards to your funding, though, do you still receive any funding from the original PPQ that was transferred to Customs when PPQ was absorbed by Customs from agriculture?
Senator, can you speak into the mic? They didn't hear your
Yeah,
question.
I don't know how much closer to the mic I can get. That's about as close as I can get without kissing the microphone, which I don't think I want to do this afternoon. Oh, you can't hear me?
Try one more time. There you go.
Well, I don't know how much closer. That's as close as I can get. With regards to the funding, when Customs absorbed PPQ, funding was also transferred to Customs. Are you still receiving funds for that?
When PPQ was assimilated by law into the Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency, we absorbed all the personnel that we could possibly absorb. So we absorbed all the PPQ officers, and so we continued to pay for their salaries. And then eventually we transitioned them from PPQ officers and made them become certified in Customs and Quarantine Agency procedures. So we absorbed all the costs, and so all of that is being paid for by the agency.
So there's no certain amount of fees coming into Customs with regards to that anymore? You just simply are paying them out of your own revenue stream?
Well, right now, we don't have any PPQ officer titles. All the officers
No,
who are...
I understand. I understand that. But in terms of the funding source that was originally transferred to you, does that no longer exist? You don't receive anything that's related to inspections for related services that PPQ used to perform?
No, we don't receive any other funding from PPQ. Actually, the service charge continued to be deposited into the Customs service charge fee.
What is your current revenue stream now in terms of, because of course we discussed previously, Mr. Director, the amount of cost of your operations right now as a result of the pandemic that the general fund and the people of Guam are now absorbing, because of course you've had a decrease in the amount of review that you're doing because of the decrease of flights coming, primarily because of the flights, because obviously the cargo aspect of it has consistently continued throughout the pandemic. Where are you with regards to your revenue stream now? How much of a percentage are you now earning versus what the general fund has been subsidizing?
Well, actually, the last information that I got from the Airport Authority is that for fiscal year 2022, we have collected approximately, I would say $500,000 because of pandemic. We do collect revenues down at the port in the amount of roughly about $800,000 a year. Yeah. So from a passenger inspection standpoint, we're still not meeting the budget requirements to fulfill our obligation without the assistance of the general fund.
So right now you got a substantial, would you say 85, 95% pretty much currently of your operations being subsidized by the general fund at this point?
Probably less than that.
Well, how much is your annual budget? It's on around $10, $11 million.
Our budget right now is 17 point.
Oh, it's even more, 17.
Yes,
And in 2022, you only generated $500,000.
yes.
Well, then I think that's even generous on my part. It's probably more than 99 point something percentage of your
No,
$500,000 versus 17 million.
we're still a long ways.
Yes.
Hopefully that we can see a better arrivals for
And that's just for your
2023.
regular operations now. That doesn't include these type of special services that you're talking about, does it? These amounts, the 17 million, is that just reflective of what's being subsidized versus what you would be receiving from these special requests here?
That's a separate there.
Okay, so it's not included in that figure. And on an average basis annually, you said you perhaps about 800,000 is what's paid for these additional services provided after hours at the port. Does that include the airport or just the port?
That's a seaport.
Just the seaport. You also brought up earlier with regards to the issue of hiring, the length of time it takes to hire potential customs officers. And I understand the training aspect of it once you get them on board. I mean, anyone, even if they have degrees or expertise or credentials, getting them orientated if they're just starting, I mean, understandable, that's going to take a little time. But what is the delay in hiring? Is that an issue for you from the time you have some qualified individual who's an applicant that applies? How long does that take on average to process?
Well, it all depends because actually we start with the recruitment process with DOA, and then DOA takes care of testing and other requirements, and then from there they provide us a listing of qualified applicants, and then we go from there.
And how long does that take on average?
Well, we've been trying to finalize our recruitment, but the challenge that I have right now is that a lot of the applicants were on military orders, so we have to make amendments to accommodate these people. Recently, like in July, we started hiring. We started our interview, I'm sorry. We started our interview, but the delay was that a lot of the applicants were under military orders. They were off island, so we had to delay the interview process until they got back, which is they got back, I think, in the tail end of July, moving into August. So we're almost finished with the interview process, and hopefully that we can pick up these officers within the next 2 weeks.
But on average, how long does it take? I mean, I understand you brought up about the, them being on military leave or whatever, military duty, but let's say you have an applicant that's not on military duty. On average, how long does it take DOA to process an applicant?
As I mentioned before, DOA handles all the processing, and whatever time frame that they have, after they complete their vetting of all these applicants, then they submit a list to my agency.
I understand. Do you have an idea of how long that takes?
And once it gets to my agency, we conduct the interview, and in a matter of weeks, we should be able to pick them up.
Okay, but do you have an idea of how long it takes for DOA to process it?
Maybe should refer that to Mr. Burns.
I understand. I'll ask him, but do you have an idea of how long, from your perspective, needing these employees, how long it takes to process?
Well, sometimes it lasts up to 3 months from the time the applicants took their tests down at DOA until the time that we receive a certification letter from DOA on the number of applicants that have passed all the written exam.
Okay, let me ask Mr. Burns, how long on average does it take for you to process an applicant, minus any other unusual delays or because they're on military duty or whatever the case may be, just a regular applicant?
Thank you, Senator. The goal here is to obviously try and recruit in batches because we want to present to the agency in this particular customs as many applicants as possible. For this particular round, and 3 months is not a bad guess, we had about just under 900 applications, of which I think it's 134 or 137 actually qualified. So we have a lot of weeding out to do, and that takes the time. But 3 months is not a bad number.
And is this specifically just for customs? You had initially 900 applicants. Is it just for customs in particular?
That tends to be the biggest number
Okay.
for the law enforcement agencies, yes.
Okay, was that just customs, or does it include Guam Police? Or I just want to clarify that in my mind.
For each of those agencies, there are fewer and fewer applicants. The largest number we had was for customs.
Okay, so who is the 900 reflective of? Customs
That's
specifically?
customs alone, yes.
And that's within what time frame that you had this 900 applicants?
That was in the latest batch of recruitments that we
And you narrowed it down to 100 and what?
130.
About 130.
134, I think it was.
That qualified. Okay, I appreciate. That's not bad for that time frame. Out of curiosity, though, because you don't have the volume of passengers, primarily because it is at the airport coming in, so you have actually less hours to put in for the customs officers, yet the general fund is subsidizing. So how is that being addressed? Because you don't have the volume, but you're keeping your officers on board, I assume, right? Nobody's on any extended leave or...
No, Senator. You have to understand that up at the airport right now, we have an average of 15 flights, commercial flights that are coming in. So we're averaging, if I'm not mistaken, 5,000 passengers a day. Yeah, but even the 5,000 passengers is still way below our pre-COVID.
And what was your average amount prior to COVID then on a daily basis?
Between 45 to 5,000 passengers a day.
Okay, and how much are you doing now? I'm trying to get the contrast pre-COVID to what you're processing today.
We're processing today about maybe 800 passengers. Probably up to 1,500.
A day now?
A day now.
And then prior was about 5,000 a day?
Yes.
All right, thank you. My time's just about up. Thank you for responding to my questions.
Thank you.
Senator Ada, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
I yield my time to Senator Dueñas.
Senator Dueñas, Senator Ada has yielded his time to you, so you get 10 minutes.
Madam Chair, and the second round has been very educational as we've gone through. So I want to point out some observations that I've made. But I want to make one thing clear from the outset. I'm not disputing the ability of customs to carry out its duties and to provide the services within the construct of the law. I'm trying to get the information and work off of data, and now that I have some in front of me, I can now further elaborate on the point of my question. One other thing I want to make abundantly clear is no business is ever going to absorb this cost, regardless how fast they want something out of the port or the airport. That is going to be passed on to the consumers. So that is the purpose for which I'm asking my line of questioning, to try to understand and ascertain, where this may land. I think we all need to be, especially in this climate, cognizant of that issue. So going forward, as I work off of the sheet here, and this is now what we're working off as off-duty service statistics for calendar year 2021, the highest amount of officers was in the calendar year was on Saturday, 5/8/21 at 55 officers, 30 for air, and 25 for the maritime. Mr. Perez, that's basically half of your workforce, correct?
It's about a third. But what date are you referencing?
So the date I'm referencing, if I'm using this calculation of manpower correctly, is Saturday, 5/8/2021. I see 30 officers under air cargo, and I see 25 under sea cargo, which is a total of 55 officers.
I'll defer to Colonel Francis Farron to discuss some of the impacts we had during that time.
Yes, we have an air freighter that brings in chilled fish on the weekends, and that's one of the days. If you look at Wednesdays, you see there's a peak too, because there's on certain days that they'll come in. And with that, they'll have 20 or more customers that is going to request for customs ODS program. it looks like on the 25, there was one occasion where Matson wasn't able to bring in their produce because of a broke ship in Honolulu. So they made arrangements to fly it in. So they had like a train of dollies of produce on a chartered aircraft, I think 2 or 3. So that was that time. It was considered maritime cargo, but they had to clear it through the airport. So there are some anomalies here. You'll see why is it so high on certain days. That's because there are certain flights that bring in produce or perishables on that certain day. They have a schedule, so that's what reflects here, because I notice Wednesdays and Saturdays are like peak. And then also we have the courier freighters that come in on the weekends. DHL, UPS, or FedEx. FedEx and UPS bring in their own aircraft to offload all these parcel shipments that they get ready for, I believe, Monday. So we process that a lot on Saturdays, Sundays, and then Monday they start delivery. So.
Okay, so the lowest date is 2/15/21, and so I just wanted to use this as an understanding to where we understand what the range we're talking about here. Because, you know, Mr. Perez, I have to say, and just for the listening public, we're going over the calendar year here, so just so we understand the impact, we're looking at, on the air cargo basis, 417,322.84, and on the seaport cargoes, 360,854 for a grand total of $778,000, $177.79, a little over $750,000. So the point I'm trying to get to, Mr. Perez, because I really want to nail this one down. It sounded like to me that you kind of were correcting the statement of this is not necessarily a manpower issue. If you're going to eliminate this cap because it's more effective to keep an officer not confined to the 275 a day. So I think what we're getting into now is what in the normal course of business we call man hours. So I just want to be clear, is that your statement basically, that manpower could be of assistance in terms of the availability of officers, but the cap is preventative because of the fact that if you want to keep that officer on and finish the job, if you will, of that inspection, that's the problem right now, because once they hit that 275, they're out of there. They can't do it anymore.
Thank you, Senator. I think maybe there's some misperception of what I was talking about. So do we have a manpower issue or a manpower shortage? Yes, we do. Could it be helped by removing this cap? Yes, it can. Those are my answers. Okay. Now, if there's anything that we can find to help mitigate and help the process for the consignee, and of course reducing costs, we're going to do that. In today's age, we're finding, of course, things are going to go up. Inflation's going to go up. Wages are going to go up. Price of gas is going to go up. So at what point do we say we're going to bite the bullet? To what detriment? Is it to the detriment where we're not doing our inspections and we just allow everything free patique, everything comes in and just not do anything? I go back to a few months ago when we had these challenges with the Chinese incursions. I mean, everybody's up in arms. Customs, what are you doing about it? And at the same time, we're trying to address these issues. So this is just a small issue. The main issue we have, of course, is manpower. We are taking people from different areas of our agency. We did a collaboration with other law enforcement officers and agencies and the federal government and local collaboration to try and address this. Now, manpower right now is currently a big issue. But to go to the other end and say, well, will this 275 removal help? Obviously. Because if it remains, what happens is that you're just creating an environment to create stumbling blocks, which becomes, at the end of the day, unfunded mandates for us because we have to absorb it either through CTO or government overtime or some other fashion, and to also take into account and consideration that we're also absorbing the administrative costs to process. So what this bill does is that it removes the 275 and allows the officer to freely focus on performing his job. So yes, there are two parts of the question you asked, and yes, we do have a manpower issue, and yes, if you remove the cap, it would go a long way towards helping us to become much more efficient at doing what we need to do for the end user at the border.
So then are you saying, because I'm just trying to catch this part, are you saying that if the cap is removed, that there's a possibility that the funding then, the fee that is charged now becomes a subsidy towards the payment and employment and improvement of the manpower of Customs?
I'm not sure what you're getting at. What I'm just trying to reemphasize is that currently we have a process that is very problematic based on a cap. And if you do a simple analysis of like the process and you find out what in this process is the biggest issue that we have to contend with, that would, if you remove it, reduces to some extent the issues that we're currently face, then why not implement it? For us, it's a mandate that we can't change because it's a law that needs to be generated or amended. We internally can't write internal policies that say we're going to go against a $275 cap because we realize that this cap is not conducive towards providing service. We realize that, but there's not much we can do without the help of the legislature.
I agree with you, and I understand that the law that we're trying to amend is the point that's prohibitive. I just think at this point, the difficulty is the policing of it, because you're presenting us with two different dilemmas here. Because I know you're having a difficult time understanding my question, but I think my question still is very basic. My question from the outset was, if you had more manpower, the cap wouldn't be a problem, because you have a manpower issue. If you remove the cap, that helps manpower, because now you have your manpower not relegated to the cap, which means that they can now provide the duty. That's why I said in the business world, we call that man hours. How many man hours does it take to unload this container, for example, if I'm in the shipping business, right? And I want to know if that, all things being equal, if that 40-footer lands on my lot and I've got these 4 employees who know what they're doing with all the equipment that they're required under normal circumstances on any given day, I can unload that container in 10 hours. That's my man hours. That's what a businessman does generally when they're calculating all of their cost of doing business, right? So, well, there was a storm. It's raining. 3 of my employees can't get here. Okay, now it might take me 15 hours. This is the anomaly that I'm presented with because conditions have changed. I'm still going to unload that container with the 1 or 2 guys if safety allows me to, until I can get the other couple of guys on board. But for this incident, I got 15 hours, man hours on that container now, not 10. All else being equal. This is the comparison I'm trying to make, because, Mr. Perez, I'm trying to arrive, because I actually think I might have an amendment that might do something for us here, because absent a study and going back and taking and this is what BBMR does, by the way, when they do their budgeting and everything else, typically they take a 3-year average, sometimes 5 years, depending on how they're doing their calculations. They'll budget agencies based on a 3-year average sometimes, because they got all the data. What were the manpower requirements? What was everything needed in order to run that place? They might cap a budget, particularly in tight times, for that reason. I'm thinking there's a possibility of trying to get information here and seeing what happens, of putting this into law for 6 months. See what happens. If this $770,000 goes to $2 million, we got a problem, Houston. or if we take a 3-year average or a 5-year average of that. But if it stays the same, but it solves the problem, or if it stays within a parameter, but it solves the problem, because now you got your guys on board and they can exceed the cap, then it's not a money issue. It's an operational issue. And maybe manpower down the road smooths that out. But the unknown is what I have a little bit of trouble with. And I hope you can sympathize with it. This is nothing against customs. I've been a great supporter of customs over the years, without question. The thing is that the unknown here in this economic environment that exists right now, I know you need to do your job, and I know this is prohibitive in terms of the way it's written for man hours, but I don't know that increasing a fee should be a solution to taking care of man hours. I think hiring people is the solution to taking care of man hours, because those officers would otherwise be there doing other duties, protecting the public.
I understand. So just to reiterate that we're talking about a cap as far as how much the officer is trying to accumulate, and I sympathize with you, but it's not a fee. It's a cap on how much an officer is supposed to be able to make, and then they have to shut down operations. All we're saying is that if there's something that allows us without this cap, and I must reiterate, it's not a fee, it's just a capability for the officer to perform his duties. But for whatever reason, 20 plus years ago, they put a $275 cap, which they thought people would not ever reach. And now here we are, 2022, and we're having to contend with it. But if you have any proffers on how to perhaps make our capability to perform our duties at the border any better, I'm open to discussion. I really am.
And I sympathize with that, because you're not the bean counter. I get it, but Mr. Byrne just testified on the record that there was a particular shortfall in this particular fiscal year, whereas it has to be a fee because it's being collected, was insufficient to cover what was being charged based on the man hours. So it is a pass-along cost, Mr. Perez. There's no way to say that this is over and above the operations of customs. This rate, this charge, it shows up somewhere. It's being collected, it's being remitted. After it's remitted, it's being doled out to customs. So it's a fee schedule. It's a capped fee schedule at this point. So that's where it goes back to, I think, a couple of the other questions were, and I do believe that this is a manpower issue when we talk about the rate, because of the fact that if you had 30 more officers at entry level rate and they were there on the day that it was 55 officers, that would be exponentially lower compared to if 40 of the 55 were senior officers. I'll continue to listen. I mean, my biggest concern, and I think our concern always has to be here, is that whenever we do this, as well-intended as it is, and as understandable as it is that you're confined by the law, we have to understand the consequences as well. And once again, while I respect many of my colleagues who have had a chance to opine on this, no business ever pays this fee. Customers pay this fee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Torres, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
Nothing further, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker Terlahi?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Byrne, have you ever done a cost-benefit analysis of hiring more employees versus this ODS with the new salaries, the 18% raises, and the hazardous pay that this law is going to implement as well on top of that?
No, Madam Speaker, but obviously the increased pay was designed to promote recruitment.
It would be possible to do one of those, is that right?
Yes.
All right. All right, so yeah, I support, customs. I understand clearly what you're trying to do, and you're trying to make sure that, that 275 is outdated, or the cap is outdated. It's not serving you anymore based on the salaries now and the hazardous pay that this bill is also authorizing for ODS. And so I want to make sure that your officers are compensated fairly. I also want to make sure that inspections are done as efficiently as possible, right? That we have the reputation of we're going to do these efficiently and we're not going to, really hold them hostage to get this done, or charge exorbitant fees. So it's a balance, right? So as a policymaker, that's the policy that I'm concerned about. And if you look at where the discretion lies kind of how that list is implemented, right? If it's implemented fairly, that's all management discretion. I can see room for wiggle, right? And the reason why I'm thinking of it is because in the past I had heard concerns about that it was, only certain people were getting that type of overtime called, or opportunity. And so if it's being implemented fairly, then of course that's good. But it's not in this law how that list is implemented, right? So that's discretion. The other thing is which company is going to get the highest paid officers versus the lowest paid officers, right? If I'm the company, I want the low paid officers if they can respond in the same time, do the same duties, because I can pay less. And I don't want any favoritism that way, you know what I mean, for the company. So that's just another area of discretion. And so when we write these bills, we have to, anticipate that different players in the game, not just you guys who, are great, but just anyone in the future, anytime. And try to write our policies as tight as possible. So for the companies now, none of these companies came in and testified, right? None of them said, oh, we're totally willing to pay this. And what I'm afraid of is none of them, at the time this bill had a hearing, had known about the 18% salary raises and the hazardous pay and what that amount's going to actually look like on a bill of theirs, right? So that's a different ballgame now. So maybe they still are willing, but I kind of agree with my colleague that maybe they're silent and maybe they're willing, because that cost is going to be passed on to the end consumers. And when you say end consumers, you're looking at, all of us consumers, families who are consuming goods. And when you used the spam example, I don't think it's 1 cent. If you add on 18% plus 10% to spam, I think that's like almost $1, right? I don't know. I'm calculating spam at $4. I don't know. I'm not the math person, but I think it's much higher than a 1 cent increase for even that type of a product, if those are added on to the end consumer. So I'm very concerned about that. And I want our reputation in this industry to be as efficient as possible while you get paid what you deserve. So I'm worried about the end consumers, and I want the system. So it looks to me like the system, the way we're designing it, it's like lessens the incentive to finish the work between 8 to 5. Because if you delay it, beyond 5, your officers, if the officers delay it beyond 5, they're going to get overtime, or somebody's going to get overtime for that, and they're going to get these higher rates, right? And they're going to get that extra opportunity. And it looks like it might increase, in theory, the incentive to extend those inspections that take place after 5, right? So ideally, we can fit everything within the hours that you've got people for. That's the most efficient way for the government to handle this, the most efficient pay scheme for the government and I think the consumers. Once we start talking overtime, everything gets more expensive, and I think there's a natural, everybody wants more overtime as an employee. You want to get paid more overtime. You want an opportunity for more overtime. And, I just think you allow opportunity, to, the incentive changes, right? So I agree with one of my previous colleagues that said, when you have this kind of discretion and this kind of incentivizing is changing, right, then it requires really a real strict oversight and management. And that's what we are going to have to do if we pass this bill, is trust that you are going to do that really demanding oversight, that we are not extending our inspections beyond 5 so that officers can get overtime, and that we are not extending our after 5 inspections to a longer period of time because of the overtime that's possible. Somebody sent me this anonymously. It says, look at their vessel clearance team. They start at the time the vessel is at pilot station. It takes 1 hour to berth, then 30 minutes to secure gangway and board the vessel. That is a whole 1 hour and 30 minutes of officers waiting to board, right? That's one issue. So that's what I'm saying. So much discretion and so much incentive to stretch it out, and it would require very detailed policies or oversight, or else you allow the potential for abuse, right? And abuse on those big customers of yours is going to be abuse on our consumers, even our small consumers, right, in the end. So I was wondering, when the airport is on 24/7 shifts, we don't have 24/7 flights. Are we able to shift some of those employees over to do cargo inspections while they're on duty?
Thank you. So there are certain things that I think that we might want to clarify, is that we're talking about an off-duty service, which is not overtime. Overtime is something that you accrue after you receive 43 hours. So off-duty service is a service that is provided to everybody. So currently, the way it works right now, right, with the current cap, let's say the cap wasn't there, no more officers are going to take the incentive right now. I think, did you say 40? How many officers are? So there are currently like 40 officers right now who are participating in an off-duty service program. So if you remove the cap, 40 officers would still be participating. The only time you would probably see an influx is when we hire the new cycle. And so I just wanted to make sure that we differentiate between overtime and off-duty service. So the benefit is that whoever volunteers to come in to perform a service is going to get compensated for coming in at 3:30 in the morning, and if they getting off a shift at like 5 o'clock in the evening and having to wake up way before he's supposed to, and then he comes in, so there's a benefit. And so that's the concept that we've used, and it's a concept that it's a model that we use based off of, again, the United States Customs Service and other federal agencies to incentivize people coming in.
Chief, you're saying overtime is when it's a continuous, right? 40 hours plus, or whatever hour, 8 hours plus over.
Right.
I understand, but I'm using overtime because you're paying them 1.5 times their regular salary, right? So that's the same rate as an overtime rate, isn't it?
But the reference that we use has always been off-duty service.
Okay, my apologies, I'll correct that. But I'm talking about the amounts, right?
Yes.
So we're paying them overtime rates, or we're paying them time and a half, plus what we pay for the beginning, right? 3 times. all of that. That's the point. So are you able to shift airport employees to do cargo when
We
there's
have-
not an airplane coming in?
Yes, so we have done that in times past, but like if you were to take a look currently at our staffing pattern, there are times when sometimes only 3 officers are on duty because of RDOs, regular days off, people who are on military, people who are on leave or medical. And so what happens is that we've been scratching our heads, and ever since the pandemic and now with the incursion of Chinese nationals coming into our shores, we've had to take a massive redirecting of officers, but at the same time, we still have people requesting for services such as this. So at the end of the day, what we're hoping to see is just to make sure that we're able to provide service. Right now, we can't provide that service based on the 104 or 108 officers that we currently have. We're looking at trying to shore up the borders because really 108, which really requires like 220 some officers in an agency or maybe even more to handle all the different program areas, is not really helping us. And so those who are working at the borders are doing the job that they need to do. And so, I mean, if necessary, yeah, we could just say wait till 08 to 1700 hours, but we've been trying to accommodate, and we've been trying to move people around. We've been moving people from different shifts to go to the airport and use people at the airport to provide government services. So yes, are we actively trying to address the situation? Yes, we are, but I think Senator Duenas also touched on it when he asked, do you have a manpower problem? Yes, we do.
Right, we've established
Yes.
there's a manpower problem,
Yes.
but we've also established there's a hiring in progress, right?
Yes.
All right, so because the salaries have been raised and there's hazardous pay being added onto that, I'm concerned that customers don't know about this, or they're going to pass that cost on to consumers. But what if we changed, instead of the 275 cap to, that's a monetary cap, to an hourly cap? For example, so every officer is entitled to 4 hours of overtime, or not overtime, sorry, ODS, or something, because I'm looking at how many hours it has taken you guys on that chart that you gave us to, it looks like 5 hours. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. All of those are very common, the number of hours needed in ODS. There's some that goes up to 9 hours. But I don't know, that's just one thing. So that we can predict, I guess if we want to predict, can you just tell us what is the highest salary with the 40% and the 18% raises and the 10% hazardous? What would the highest salary be, so we can calculate that? And what is the lowest salary with the 18% and the 10% hazardous pay? Like just the hourly rate.
I couldn't tell you what the different hourly rates are, but if there's another way to skin the cat, and you were saying, like, let's say 275, if there's another potential, it seems like you may have an idea, like if you're saying, like, let's say we limit it to 6 hours per day, would that work? I don't know. I mean, if there's something that we can do.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find a way to incentivize that they are efficient, right? That they get it done within the time, because they know, they're not going to get paid if they go beyond, they're going to have to stop if they go beyond 6 hours of an inspection, and that they try to get all inspections done within a number of hours. I don't know, that's really a management thing. We can't legislate that type of thing. It's very much management, but
We would have to take a look at that, because that would still have the potential for, like, let's say you put a cap and say, we'll make it 6 hours, because on average, we find it 6 hours.
Mhm.
But then you're heading into your 7th hour, then you're going to say, we're back at the same junction where we were with the 275 cap.
there are exceptions, but yeah, I feel like we've got to find another way to manage inspections that are going to require 8 hours, after a person's shift. That's just, I don't know. Okay, so what about, the salary rates, the highest salary, we can't tell right now, and the lowest salary?
Possibly the highest salary, looking at a possible solution is, of course, using the highest salary, the able officer to perform the work. I don't have the staffing pattern, but maybe you can.
We can provide that at a later.
Yeah, we can provide that at a later date, and also to using all the increments since the inception of the existing law 20 years ago. We can. Oh, we do have it. So.
The other thing is, so we're talking about big companies, Matson bringing in cargo or cargo people, businesses here taking the cargo, but this also applies, doesn't it, to like boaters going back and forth to Rota, bringing kamuti. They can't land without customs going and inspecting their boat. These fees are going to apply to them as well, right?
Yes, if they come outside of our normal business hours.
Right. Yeah. Between 8 and 5,
yeah,
which is...
So we encourage them to come in.
This is another complaint I've received from the boaters, so this is why I'm bringing this up. They wait for people to arrive, even though they've made kind of like advance appointments or say we'll be there within an hour, they hope. But it's that cost we're going to pass on to them for an inspection of kamuti or whatever in the boat. Yeah, the same cost we're passing on, and I am afraid of passing on. But I'll wait for that information. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Okay, that concludes our second round. We'll now go into the third round for any amendments. But at this time, I am going to release the panel. Thank you very much for joining us and advocating for your agency. You did exceptionally well. We're going to go into a quick recess. We are back from recess. We do have some amendments that are going to be proffered. We'll start with Speaker Terlahi. Can you just clarify where in the Google Drive the amendment is at, or where it's hung, while they print out the original hard copy versions for our colleagues? Madam Clerk, can you clarify where the amendment is at in the Google Drive? Is it uploaded in the Google Drive? Okay, thank you. Go ahead and refresh your Google Drive, colleagues. And you will see it. In the Google Drive. The Madam Speaker will read the
Thank you, Madam
file
Chair.
name.
So the amendment is B292L8, page 4, COTW. So B292 TMT L8P4. L8P4. Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is, as I spoke earlier on the second round, I have no objection to the ODS. I have no objection to making a way for customers of the port and the airport to get their cargo inspected during off hours so that they can get perishables, especially promptly. And I have no objection to our customs officers getting paid what they are worth after they've already completed their full shifts, and they are entitled to time and a half or more, it looks like, according to their current rates. But my concern, of course, is that we're passing these rates on to consumers in the end. And I'm talking about, families. And so I think we have to try. I haven't found a way to completely do this, but I want to try to incentivize that they do not extend their inspections beyond 8 to 5, that they try to get them all done, that they have some kind of incentive to get them done between 8 and 5, and that if they are not able, and the consumers, are given a fair process of requesting, that they're willing to pay time and a half for them and hazardous pay for them to inspect outside of 8 to 5, that is really overseen in a very fair way, that the officers that are allowed to do that are given equal opportunity, and that we do not, overcharge these companies by, dragging out the hours so that we get more overtime. And of course, that's all good faith, and I believe that they operate in good faith, but I just want our laws to prevent against any type of abuse if possible. So I'm proposing one amendment, and so the other thing is, and we pointed out that there's a disparity between what companies are going to pay. Some are going to pay the highest salaries in the customs times, the 18% raises times the 10% hazardous pay for the number of hours worked. Some companies are going to pay the lower salaries amongst the customs officers, with the hazardous pay and the 18% raises. So there might be a great disparity, and I don't think this 18% or the hazardous pay was calculated by any company at the time, yet. It's going to be implemented, and so they will be seeing these higher fees. So my amendment is, the bill is proposing to remove the cap of $275 for this off-duty inspection that any one officer can earn, the $275 existing cap. The bill proposes to remove it. So I'm proposing that instead of leaving no cap, that we put a 4-hour cap. And that way, whatever rate they're entitled to, but we put a 4-hour per officer per day, and that is in hopes of incentivizing them when they are working off duty to do those inspections as efficiently as possible. And hopefully not charge the customers at the port for waiting for the ships to berth or other things like that, and that they can get the work done within the 4 hours. And I know that there will be exceptions, so, I don't know, that they're going to have to find a way around this, I guess, for when they need to have more than 4 hours worth of inspections, maybe switch off with another officer. But I'm just trying to find a way to give some kind of incentive. And I know this is not fail-proof, and it doesn't cover every possibility, but I'm trying to give some kind of incentive for that these inspections are done as thoroughly and efficiently as possible at the lowest cost to the consumers. So that would be my amendment, Madam Chair, is it to add the words but not to exceed a maximum of 4 hours per officer per day.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, the amendment is on line 8, page 4. It's on section I, subsection I, and it reads, but not to exceed a maximum of 4 hours per day. 4 hours per officer per day. It's the last sentence in the subsection. Okay. Yes, we'll start again from the back room, but we'll start with Senator Blas. Senator Blas, do you wish to speak on the
amendment, Madam Chair?
On the amendment. Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, if the author can yield to an inquiry, and the inquiry is basically, this is amendment, and I understand what you wanted to do was for promote efficiency, is to limit the officers to no more than 4 hours per day. And I see what you want to do here. The question may be, if you were to read the whole subsection in its entirety, it may seem that it may only apply to the hazardous duty pay, if where it's at, as opposed to putting that language prior to the start of and in accordance with 6224, putting that language there. Because if you take out everything else, it reads as if it's going to be just for the hazardous pay.
Is that
But
your
I guess for a point of clarity, we're talking
Okay.
about the full pay, not just the hazardous pay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Speaker, do you yield?
Yeah, I would yield. I can see where the previous speaker would ask that question, and I would ask that if the intent is clear, that legal be allowed to make that change. I'm putting it exactly in the place where we took out the not to exceed a maximum charge of $275 per officer per day, and putting in not to exceed a maximum of 4 hours per officer per day. But I can see that after the hazardous pay has been added into this section, we want to make it crystal clear. So I don't have any proposed language for that. I would yield to the Legislative Council if the officer, if my colleague would make that amendment.
Madam Chair,
Okay,
can I
that-
take
that's-
a 1 minute recess to talk to legal counsel?
Just, if we could just ask her to make that amendment after,
Yeah.
if this amendment passes?
Right.
The placement
Yeah,
of
yes,
the...
I know. We're going to move on with the, any questions, and then we'll do the motion that she has for legal to make that technical correction within that context that you brought up. Okay, do you want to speak on the
Sure.
amendment?
No, go ahead. Yeah, that'll work.
We're okay? Okay. Thank you, Senator. That's all? Okay, and is there anyone else that would like to speak on the TMT amendment? Senator Chris Drainus, you are recognized.
Madam Chair. I'm going to support the amendment absent of any other opportunity to really kind of try to put some clarity to what we're trying to accomplish here with the off-duty service charge. Because I'm going to continue to be on the record that if there is an exponential increase in costs associated with it, we're going to have to revisit this. But I think this is at least an attempt to ensure that there's some additional built-in accountability to this process. Because really, absent that, by eliminating the charge, and when we were listening to Customs presentation, and when we read BBMR's note that basically says without data, that's clearly what they say. That's BBMR, the financial control arm of our government that basically is supposed to opine on the effect of legislation that has a fee schedule attached to it and the impacts. They make it clear in the fiscal note. Without the data, they cannot ascertain what any potential impact is. So I'm a little bit more comfortable with at least the language here, trying to cap it at the 4 hours from the officer to see if that ensures that kind of what I was talking about during my back and forth with the officials that were here, that there's a containment of man hours under normal circumstances of what should have to happen based on their current manpower shortage. Because if we go based on the testimony that was provided to us, if there were 30 or 40 more officers on the beat right now, this probably wouldn't even be an issue. So we're going to have to see what the result is on that. But I think this at least gives some level of accountability, because it's something that it's another tool that we can use in the event that there is a surge in costs associated with this. We have a new data point, if you will. Because it seems like it's not open-ended. Just remove the charge and everything will be okay. We won't have the issues anymore. But I'm not convinced of that at this point. So it gives me a little bit extra level of comfort that in the event we need to revisit this, at least we have a reference point to go back to. So why is it that when we remove the cap, but constituted a 4-hour maximum per officer, now we have something we can extrapolate data from on the impact. I mean, who knows, Madam Chair, we may be, blissfully surprised. It went down. I don't know. That would be a great surprise. But in the event that it doesn't, this body and the body going forward will be answering to that potentiality of a surge in costs. So I rise in support of the amendment. I have some concerns with the bill. I wish we would do some more committee work on it, but in the event that it proceeds in this fashion, this will tend to give me a tad bit more comfort. Madam Chair.
Senator Torres.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see this amendment a different way, and my concern is if the inspection exceeds 4 hours, it's going to require customs to then have whichever officer reaches the 4-hour threshold to cease, and they're going to have to pause and find another officer or officers to come in and cover and complete the cargo inspection. Because as I understand from what the panel testified, once they open the container, they will not close the container until the inspection is complete. They won't reopen it for another time. So it will require them to come in and call another officer to finish off the inspection. Now, if the concern is the cost of that off-duty services inspection and containing the cost, which theoretically is passed on to the consumer, and that's the argument being made for wanting to contain that charge or the charges, then we may not be doing it by putting this amendment in. Because if you were to cease, someone reaches a cap of 4 hours, you call in somebody to cover them, the first hour of that cover, the person replacing those that have capped is at 3 times that officer's rate. So by restarting, that first hour is always the most expensive. So assuming they all begin at the same time and all have to be replaced at the 4th hour, the end of the 4th hour, then their replacements all are getting charged or billed at 3 times the rate. So that would be my concern. I don't think you're necessarily saving. And incentive is one thing. I mean, there have been many things that are said in this committee report that are very unflattering to customs, perhaps unwarranted. But the point remains, customs has a duty to perform, and they have a duty, as the director said, to be trustworthy and to perform, at the highest professional level. Now, the fact that this off-duty services is a voluntary service suggests that the cost of providing that service is going to determine whether the shippers opt for it or not. It's going to price itself out if it becomes ridiculously too high. But the point I want to make in closing, Madam Chair, is that this is a long-standing service. It's been in the books for at least 20 years, or the cap has been, but the service is an ordinary service, and the fee schedule that is charged is consistent with what is charged in the nation and federally. So I think for purposes of the of shippers and customs, it serves in their best interest to be consistent with the industry standard. And so with that dialogue, if the cap is to ensure that the prices are contained, I don't think that we're necessarily containing it. I think we could be creating a worse situation by having the 3 times the hourly rate kick in once the 4 hours is met. So with that, I would respectfully object to the amendment.
There's been an objection to the amendment. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on the Terlahi amendment? If there is no one else, Speaker Terlahi, you're welcome to close.
I'll waive the close.
Okay. So now we will vote on the amendment. There has been an objection. All those in favor of the Terlahi amendment, please raise your hand. 2, 3, 4, 5. Amendment fails. Speaker Terlahi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that has amendments for this bill? Okay, if not, any discussion on this bill? Okay, if not, we are going to ask my Vice Chair, Senator Torres, to come replace me so that we can move the bill and rise from the Committee of the Whole. We'll go into a quick recess.
Colleagues, we're back from recess. Senator Nelson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to rise from the Committee of the Whole with a recommendation that Bill number 292-36 LS will be placed in the third reading file.
Madam Chair, I rise to a point of information.
State your point of information.
Madam Chair, my understanding is that we are in the Committee of the Whole for several additional bills. Are we going to be rising for every bill independently?
That's, if I may, I'll yield to the question, Madam Chair.
Sure.
So this bill was specifically under my purview as the oversight chair. So this is why we had the Committee of the Whole for this bill, and I believe that the other bills are in Senator San Augustine's committee, and so we'll have to go back into the Committee of the Whole for his bill. We need to rise to move this bill forward.
Okay, so additional point of information, Madam Chair. So is it the intention of the mover then to rise and then attempt to place the bill in third reading?
As
Yes.
parliamentary procedures allow, yes, Madam Chair, that is the intention.
For Bill 292.
Thank you,
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Nelson, you may proceed. Or Senator Nelson?
Yes, I already made the motion, Madam Chair, for the bill to be placed on the third reading file.
Okay, on that motion, are there any objections? Hearing and seeing no objections, the motion carries. We stand in recess.
We are back from recess. Majority Leader Nelson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to report back to the body after the deliberation of Bill number 292-36 LS with the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole to place the bill on the third reading file for voting.
On the motion, there's been an objection to the motion. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. Senator Nelson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to make a motion that we, wait a minute. Just give me a quick recess.
We're in recess. We are back from recess. Majority Leader Nelson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to make a motion that we recess till 10 a.m. tomorrow.
On the motion, the motion is to recess until 10 a.m. tomorrow. Hearing no objections, we are in recess until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.